In the small town of Gmunden, where the majestic Haute Traunsee meets the imposing mountain panorama, lived a boy named Felix. Felix was a figure that seemed to have sprung from the pages of a melancholic novel. Tall, about 1.80 meters, with a pallor reminiscent of the paper of an unpublished manuscript, and a shyness that clung to him like a second skin. Felix had only two passions in life, both of which regularly brought him to the brink of despair: playing computer games and cycling. The irony of his existence, however, was that he was hopelessly untalented in both activities. When Felix sat down at his computer to immerse himself in the unspeakable shooter games he loved so much, he was always the first to be shot. His virtual opponents seemed to exert an unmistakably magnetic attraction on him, repeatedly sending him to the digital afterlife. He tried various tactics, sometimes hiding, sometimes charging forward, but the result was always the same. Even before the game really began, Felix was virtually lying in the dust, while his teammates, whom he only knew as strangers from distant lands, poured their frustration and ridicule over him. But not only in front of the screen, but also in real life, Felix attracted the looks of people, especially when he was on his bike. This bike, an old clunker, was a symbol of freedom and independence for him, but a source of endless amusement for passers-by. Felix sat so upright and stiff on his saddle, it was as if someone had stuck a broomstick in his backside. The people who saw him on the streets of Gmunden couldn't help but smile. This became particularly noticeable on his regular rides along the Traunsee, where tourists and locals alike witnessed his peculiar appearance. One sunny afternoon, when the sky over Gmunden shone such an intense blue that it almost hurt, Felix decided to take a boat trip on the Traunsee. The water sparkled like 1,000 diamonds, and the impressive sight of the Seeschloss Ort, built in the 10th century and first mentioned in documents in 909 and later in 1053, gave the day an almost magical atmosphere. On board the ship, Felix met a group of long-time Gmunden residents who looked at the tourists with undisguised disdain. These older citizens, deeply rooted in the tradition and pride of their town, saw the foreigners as intruders desecrating the old Gmunden. Felix, in his unobtrusive and shy manner, escaped their stern gaze. As the waves of the Traunsee gently lapped against the hull of the ship, a young tourist from Bremen sat down next to Felix. She was a pretty, blonde young woman whose hair shone like liquid gold in the sunlight. Her blue eyes sparkled with curiosity, and a friendly smile played around her lips. She wore a summery dress that flattered her slender figure, and her skin was slightly tanned by the sun. Her name was Anna, and she started a conversation with Felix as if she instinctively sensed that he needed her company. Anna told Felix that she came from Bremen and had an unusual hobby horsing. Felix, whose interest was piqued, listened fascinated as Anna told him about this sport, in which participants recreate the movements of show jumping and dressage with homemade hobby horses. Her eyes shone as she spoke, and Felix couldn't help but be infected by her enthusiasm. Back home, Felix couldn't stop thinking about Anna's words. He sat down at his computer and began searching the internet for information about hobby horsing. He found videos of competitions where young people with impressive elegance and skill jumped over obstacles as if they were real riders on real horses. Felix, who had always looked for a way to prove himself, was fascinated. In the following weeks, Felix began to make his own hobby horse. He spent hours carving the wood, painting the head, and making the mane out of yarn. When his hobby horse was finally finished, he began to practice. To his surprise, his upright posture and precise coordination, which had always eluded him in computer games and cycling, proved to be beneficial here. His elegance and grace in hobby horsing soon impressed the skeptical citizens of Gmunden. Felix won tournament after tournament and became a local celebrity overnight. The people who had once smiled at him now looked at him with respect. Anna, the pretty girl from Bremen, remained close to him in thought, and they regularly exchanged messages, with her encouraging and supporting him. Felix had finally found his niche, an activity in which he was not only good, but exceptional. From then on, he was often seen on the streets of Gmunden, proudly carrying his hobby horse, attracting the looks of people who now met him with respect and admiration. He was ready to conquer the world with his new hobby. And who knows, maybe he would one day really be able to live off it. The audience that had once laughed at him now laughed with him, not at him.